All right, with that, I'm going to introduce Mr. Eugene Owens. He's a Marine Corps veteran of Vietnam. He spent 5 years in active duty and another 21 years in the reserves. He retired as a sergeant major, and he's going to tell us the story tonight of what is known as the Montford Marines. They were the first Marine regiment put together of African Americans, and they had their own special place down near Camp Lejeune at Montford Point. And he's going to tell us the history of these Marines, and I'm looking forward to hearing this story. So if you'd come on up here, Eugene. Welcome to the Yankee Air Museum.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. My throat's a little scratchy, so it's something that I acquired from my last tour. So if you can't understand me or something, just let me know. I'll try and speak loud enough for you. My name is Eugene Owens. I'm a retired Sergeant Major Marines, and I served in the Marine Corps from 1965 through 69. I spent 2 tours in Vietnam. Spent some time in the States. I trained officers and did a few things like that. But what I'm here to talk to you tonight about is a particular part of the history. A lot of people don't know anything about it, and I think it'll be very interesting. First thing about the Marine Corps, we all know, of course, that the Marine Corps started in 1775 at Tong's Tavern, Philadelphia. Tong's Tavern happened to be a bar. No inference on why the Marine Corps started in a bar, but that's where it started at. Now, traditionally, the Marine Corps, well, I'm sorry, let me stop for a second. I want to refer back. I'm with the Montford Point Detachment of the Marine Corps League, and the Montford Point Detachment was started by the first Black Marines in 1956. The Marines here you see in the red coats, these are some of my members that come out to support us. So I wanted to acknowledge them that they're here. And going back to 1775, when the Marine Corps started. Now, as a Marine, one thing about the Marine Corps, they hammer your history into you. The Marine Corps lives off its history. And we got a very glorious history. But one thing that I never knew, and I found out much later, the first African American Marines came in the Marine Corps in 1775. They were a part of the Continental Marines. They served actually with, they was recruited by Samuel Nicholas, and they served with George Washington when they crossed the Delaware. This was something that was lost. Now, after the Revolutionary War, Congress passed a law prohibiting African Americans from serving in the military. Now, this law stayed into effect all the way up until the Civil War. And during the Civil War was when they first allowed African Americans to serve in the military after then. But it didn't apply to the Marine Corps. Now, the Marine Corps did not have any African Americans until 1942. President Franklin Roosevelt signed an order ordering that all government branches of the government would admit African Americans. And the Marine Corps and the Navy was extremely resistant to this. One of the main reasons that they was resistant, other than the racial issue, was because of segregation. A lot of people don't know that during that period, the country was totally segregated. it was illegal. Actually, what we're doing now would have been illegal. For me to talk to you as me being black, you being white, during segregation, that was illegal. So the military, following the law, was segregated. Now, the Army was a little bit different in the sense that the Army had black troops since the Civil War. And you've probably heard the stories of the Buffalo Soldiers. And they were the ones that served out west. And a lot of the stuff you see, they did in the western states. But the Navy, and of course there was beginning to be an Air Force in World War II, but it wasn't one. It was the Air Corps. Now, the Navy was resistant because they primarily served on ships. So how do you segregate a ship? You couldn't do it. They had to sail at such close quarters. They had to live together. The way the Navy finally solved the problem, the Navy agreed to have an all-black destroyer. And actually that black destroyer served with the Coast Guard. But the Marine Corps resisted totally. General Holcomb says, no way. He says, if African Americans want to serve, let them go over to the Army or to the Navy, but we don't want them in the Marine Corps. And after much resistance, the general finally saw it the president's way, and he says, okay, we'll do it. He says, now we got to create a camp. We got to create a place to train them. And they decided on this camp at Montford Point, Camp Lejeune, Montford Point, North Carolina. And this is how they became known as, of course, the Montford Point Marines. The word went out after it was decided that they were going to accept African Americans in the Marine Corps. The word went out through the African American community that because they said that they'll never make it, and they're not tough enough, they're not, it's the same old thing. So they wanted to make sure that the ones that went would make it. So they had one of the first that served, and matter of fact, the camp now is named after him. The camp is named Hashmark Johnson. Now, Hashmark Johnson had served with the Buffalo Soldiers. He served in the Navy, and he was in the Navy at the time that he heard that they were going to allow black Marines for the first time. And he wrote a letter to his commanding officer and requested that the Navy release him so that he could go join the Marines. And they did. They released him to join the Marines. And that's how he ended up with the name Hashmark Johnson, because anybody familiar with the military know that your years of service is your hash marks. Well, he was a private reporting to Marine Corps boot camp, but he had all these hash marks from all his years of service. So he got the name of Hashmark Johnson. Now, the situation was, and like I'll go back to that, you're talking about a time that a lot of people can't even realize how bad it was. You think about segregation. Montford Point is in North Carolina. Now, you're going to send black troops down to North Carolina to be trained by the Marine Corps that don't want them. The Marine Corps training was bad enough as it was, but you're going to send these troops down there to be trained in North Carolina. So the Marine Corps, first thing they told them was that you're going to have to build your own camp. So they had to come in and build their own camp. And once they finished building their camp, then they were going to be trained. And talking to, we have 3 members of our detachment that are Montford Point Marines. They're all in their 90s. And one of them, actually we have 4, and one that he hasn't been coming to circulating for the last 3 or 4 years because of his health. But he used to tell me this story that when he first got there, they sat him out in this field, and they made him sit out there all day. And as the new recruits come in, the new recruits would join them, sit out there with them. By nightfall, they had probably 30 or 40. The drill instructors came out and told them, says, "We told you we don't want you. The Marine Corps do not want you. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to give you the opportunity to go home." So they brought in trucks, and they loaded them all on the trucks. They took them 3 or 4 hours out into the North Carolina woods. And this guy that told me the story, he was from the South. He was a hunter. He knew his way around the woods. And he was telling everybody on the trucks, he says, pay attention to where you're going. So they took him out in the middle of the woods, put him off the trucks. They told him, says, "We told you we don't want you. But if any of you can make it back to the camp by daylight, we'll train you." They got back on the trucks and left. So they spent all night long trampling through the woods of North Carolina. And he told everybody from the beginning, says, do not, if you see farmhouses, do not go to them. Do not go to anybody's farmhouse. You know, you're black, in the middle of the night, you walk up to somebody's farmhouse, that's where they're going to find you. But anyway, he says about before daylight, him and the group that he was with made it back. And he says when they got back, drill instructors told them to sit down in that same field. And he says as the hours went by, guys come staggering. These guys was in their civilian clothes. Some of them had suits on and stuff like this. They started out like that. But you imagine what happened going in the underbrush all night long. He says about 9 o'clock in the morning, just about everybody was back. And the drill instructors came out and told them, says, you guys really are stupid. You had the opportunity to go home. You didn't have to serve. If you'd have just went home, you'd have been okay. But you want to be Marines. So, of course, their boot camp started. They did everything they could because you just imagine when you have orders from the Commandant of the Marine Corps that we don't want them. So you got carte blanche to do anything you can to them to make them quit. Make them give up, make them quit. He said that after about 5 weeks of training, they had a formation, and one of the white drill instructors told them, he said, we was on orders to destroy you guys, to make you quit. We have done everything we can think of, and you're still here. So now we're going to seriously train y'all as Marines. And those were the first ones. So they went through the training. Now, there is a book, The Right to Fight. I came across this many years after I was in the Marine Corps. I knew nothing about it. And basically the book tells the the whole history of African Americans from the Revolutionary War on up through World War II. Now, one thing that was a fact was that Montford Point stayed open from 1942 to like 1948 before they officially desegregated the military. So after World War II, at the end of the war, there was a lot of effort to eliminate it, but the politicians, they were able to keep it open. So in 1948, they desegregated Montford Point and mixed them in with the rest of the military. But during the time after they trained them, there was two battalions. The two original battalions was the 51st and 52nd Defense Battalions. And the 51st was the first one that they sent overseas. And they participated in all of the landings. They were at Iwo Jima, Tarawa, every landing in the Pacific. And they actually, some of the first units to go into Japan after the war, they also participated in that. Some of the pictures here, this Howard Perry was the very first African American to enlist in the Marine Corps. This gentleman here, Andrew Evans. Andrew Evans, when he went in the Marine Corps, he was 15 years old. He went to his mother and asked his mother to lie for him. And his mother says, if you really want to go, you're sure you really want to do it. So his mother lied about his age and got him in. He was 15. These were the first African Americans to wear the dress blue uniform. And that was in 1942. So they were the first ones to be issued the dress blue uniform. Now, a number of things happened in their time in the Pacific. Now, one of the things that was primarily their duties was to work unloading the ships with ammunition, supplying the front lines, and bringing back the wounded. There was a Marine, a white Marine from Florida that wrote a book, and the name of the book was The Black Angels of Peleliu. And the reason he wrote the book, he was wounded one night and during the fighting with the Japanese, and as their unit pulled back, he ended up getting separated from the unit, and he was left out by himself. So as a result, after dark, he figured that I'm wounded, Japanese are going to get me. You know, I'm going to fight as long as I can, but it's going to be over. So later that night, after the dark, somebody jumped in the hole with him and said that I'm Sergeant so-and-so and I'm going to be with you tonight. So him and this other Marine fought off a couple of attacks. When daylight came, he turned around and looked at this guy, and he was black. And he said, "Who are you?" He says, "I was with you all night." He said, "Yeah, but who are you?" He says, "I'm Sergeant," I don't know what his name was, and he says, "I'm a Marine." He said, "There ain't no colored Marines." He says, "Well, I'm here, and I was with you all night." So the black Marine ended up picking him up, taking him back to the aid station. So when he got back to the aid station, he was laying in the aid station next to the other guy, and he says, "Who was that?" And the other white Marine next to him said, "Those are the Black Angels of Peleliu." And that's where he got that. And he wrote the book about the things that they did. Another part of that same story was that the Marines up in the front line had been really chewed up really bad. And the Marine First Sergeant sent a corporal back, says, "Go back to the beach, get some reinforcements. We got to have some people up here. We got wounded people. We got some like 70% casualties." So he went back to the beach, and he was telling them, says, "We need some reinforcements up there." And this officer told him, says, "We haven't got anybody." So the blacks that was unloading the ships and stuff said, "We'll go." And he looked, and he says, "Well, you guys don't want to go." And they said, "Yeah, we'll go." So he says, "Well, okay." So about 20 of the black Marines got their rifles and stuff, and they went up there. So when he got to the first sergeant says, "Who are they?" And he says, "Well, they say they're Marines." And the first sergeant told him, "There ain't no black Marines." He said, "Well, they're here and they say they're Marines." So he says, "Y'all want to fight?" And they said, "Yeah, we want to." So he said, "Well, okay, go ahead." But he was also one of the ones that was saying that they didn't know that there was black Marines. And that was the first time that they'd ever seen. And you have to look at the numbers, because Montford Point, during the time that Montford Point was open, they trained about 18,000. A lot of people don't understand that at that time, even today, African Americans is only like 14% of the population. And back then, they were like 10%. So during the whole time that Montford Point was open, they trained like 18,000 men. And if you look at the numbers, the Marines lost 7,000 killed on Iwo Jima. 7,000 Marines was lost in that one battle. So you can see how the numbers of African Americans was very small. But they stood up, they held their honor, and they did exactly what was said they could not do. Some of these pictures over here are pictures of the first platoons. There's one picture over there of the African Americans on the beach at Peleliu. And later on, the tradition was carried on. We have a picture there of a black pilot. He was actually the first black pilot in the Marine Corps. And he also became the first black general. And he was the first one to command a squadron. He died about 6 months ago. But that's basically the story. Does anybody have any questions?
Did they also serve in the European theater?
No, actually, Marines didn't serve in the European theater. The Marines was in the Pacific, so they didn't serve in the European theater. Now, there was African American Army units that served in Europe, and also you know about the Tuskegee Airmen, and they were in the European theater. Yeah.
There was also 20 black Marines on the Battle of Put in Bay that most people don't know about, with Oliver Perry.
Oh, yeah. Okay, they were on the, okay. Yeah, because now they were the Continental Marines, right? Yeah. So it's after, like I say, after the Revolutionary War, the law was passed that they couldn't serve, and that's what pulled them out. And and it wasn't until World War II that they were able to get back. question.
Yes, so by Korea, the ground units were integrated, black and white in the same units?
Yes, yes.
When did the black Marines move into the drill instructor ranks?
Well, during, you're talking about like during the Vietnam, I mean during World War II?
Yeah.
Well, what they did is that the first few platoons that went through was trained by white drill instructors. And then they picked, as fast as they could, they picked blacks that was capable, and they replaced the white drill instructors till they got to the point. Matter of fact, there's a picture there, the second one from the left, and it is a class of black drill instructors that was at Montford Point. So they replaced them as soon as they were able to.
Do you know what became of the fellow who joined at 15?
He was a member of our detachment, and he left a couple of years ago. He moved down to Ohio, and because of his health, and he had his daughter. He lives with his daughter down there in Ohio.
Did he stay in the Marines?
No, he got out after the war.
Okay.
Yeah, I think after World War II, just about it. I imagine the door was, a lot of people was going out that door. So, anyone else have any questions? Now, Howard Perry, the very first black Marine, today he is a school teacher in Philadelphia. I saw him on CNN about 2 months ago, and he is a school teacher in Philadelphia. Oh, he's got to be in his 80s. Yeah.
Who is the first black Marine Medal of Honor recipient or Navy Cross recipient?
Okay, that was, he was, trying to remember his name, because they named the ship after him. But the first black Marines that received the Medal of Honor was during Vietnam. And we had 5 of them that, this is one of them here. Robert Jenkins, he was one of the 5 in Vietnam that received the Medal of Honor. But all of them was in Vietnam. Historically, would you remember his name?
His name was, I forgot his first name, but it was a Sergeant Davis.
Rodney Davis.
Rodney Davis, and he received the Medal of Honor. It was actually in Vietnam. In a nutshell, what he did, he jumped on a grenade and saved his platoon.
What about the Navy Cross? Who was the first one to get the Navy Cross?
That one I don't know. Navy Cross is either you get the big one or you don't count. Oh, sorry. But now, when you talk about the Navy Cross, now during Pearl Harbor, there was a Navy seaman that received the Medal of Honor. I mean, the Navy Cross. And it was funny because he received a Navy Cross for saving the captain of the ship and shooting down one of a Japanese plane. And he was actually, during the war, he did a lot of recruiting of black people to join the military.
What about the first Sergeant Major?
First Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps was, let me see if thought I had a picture of him, but he, let me see, I do have a picture, right? Because I met him in Vietnam. He was the first sergeant major. Well, actually, now that goes back to the history. There was 2 because there was a sergeant major before integration. Now, that was Hashmark Johnson. Hashmark Johnson became the first sergeant major before integration, and I was trying to remember the name of the one after integration. Edgar Huff. Edgar Huff became the first black sergeant major after integration. Now, one thing about Edgar Huff, he was a sergeant major. Oh, I explained what happened. Because during the time that they were integrated, they had to create a rank structure for the black Marines. So you would take, say a white Marine might take 5 years to make corporal. Well, they didn't have that time with the blacks, so they had to promote them right up. So they promoted them faster if they had any experience or they, was smart enough, they promoted them up the line because they needed to fill those billets because they didn't have any, they were segregated. Well, after segregation, you had a white sergeant major that had 30 years in the Marines, and you had a black sergeant major that only had 8 years in the Marines. So it didn't match out. So a lot of the blacks, they lost rank to fill them back into, and they had to earn that rank all over again. So that's what happened. They had to earn the rank over again. Sergeant Major Huff, when he went to Korea, he was the first sergeant. He was the only black in his battalion. And he was the first sergeant of a company. And they've interviewed him after that. Was, how was it being the only black in the battalion and you're the first sergeant? And he said that he didn't have any problems, no real problems. Also, Huff was like 6'4" or something like that. But he says that Marines are, Marines are Marines. Another question?
Can you tell us about your service in Vietnam?
Okay, like I said, I joined the Marine Corps in '65, went through boot camp, went to Okinawa, and trained for jungle warfare, went through jungle warfare school because the plan was then that they were going to take the Marines, which they basically kind of did it, and break them up and put them out into the small unit tactics. But when I got there, I ended up going with 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, and that was our commanding officer was a Colonel Fisher. And Colonel Fisher was from the old World War II class. And he was on a mission. So he kind of operated, he told us from the very beginning that every time there's an operation going, either you guys going to lead it or you're going to be on it. And so we did. So we was involved in almost everything we could find. So I served with the 4th Marines, ended up getting wounded outside of Da Nang, spent a month in the hospital, then went back and finished out my tour. So we started out at Chu Lai and worked our way all the way up to the DMZ. So we were on basically every major operation there was. Yeah.
I know you avoided it, but what was the nickname of 2-4?
2-4 was Colonel Fisher's Magnificent Bastards. And he's got a lot of, Colonel Fisher was like, if you made a movie about anybody, he would have been the one you'd make the movie about. But what did you say about that?
Me?
Yeah.
The story of how they got that name?
Yeah.
There was one operation the battalion went on, and the colonel had told his troops, he says, they want body counts. He says, I want a head. And there was a lance corporal in one of the companies in the outfits, and it stuck in his head. So during the operation, the firefight, they cleaned up, search and destroy mission. He came back, and this lance corporal walked back in the colonel's office. He had this bag. He walked in there, didn't ask for permission. Said, Colonel. Colonel looked at him. Here's your blanking head. Walked out. Most of you gentlemen can imagine what he said. Anyway, he walked out. Colonel jumped up. He says, opened it up, saw the head. He says, these are my magnificent bastards. Today, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines is still known as magnificent bastards of the 4th Marine Regiment. Me, I was with 1-4. And that was a gorgeous story.
Who was the first black Marine that was in Marine Force Recon?
Huh?
Who was the first black Marine that was in Marine Force Recon?
You know, I don't know. I know that the Marine here was in there, but I'm not sure who was the first. Actually, you know, during that time, they probably wasn't keeping any track anymore. You know, after integration, and that is one of the reasons that the whole history of black Marines was lost. A few years ago, Congress gave the Montford Point Marines the Congressional Gold Medal. And at that time, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, I was at the ceremony in Washington, D.C. at the time. And that time, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, we was at 8th and I, he said that, he says, out of all my years in the Marine Corps, he'd been in the Marine Corps 34 years. And he says, I didn't know anything about the Montford Point Marines. So now he's a commandant. And he'd been in the Marine Corps 34 years, and he said that he just found out about the Montford Point Marines. So that just shows you how that, you know, there was no record. Yeah.
2 questions. 1, may I ask your age? And 2, have you considered writing a book?
I thought about writing a book. I thought about it, laughed about it, and forgot about it. No, but I'm 69. I did 28 years with the Detroit Police Department too. So I've been fighting all my life. Is that it? Question.
Can you compare and contrast what it was like to be a black Marine and how you were treated as a civilian as well? How was it different being in the military versus being?
Well, pretty much, I never had any trouble here. And
I think you grew up in Detroit.
yeah, I grew up in Detroit. But I guess because of my age, I kind of missed. I was in the Marine Corps during the real height of the civil rights thing. And I was young enough that I grew up on the east side. So I never really had any real problem. But now, and I'll tell you, like, the racial issues, I went to drill instructor school down at Parris Island. And just to show you how it was, and this here was in 1967. It was 4 of us that rode down together, 4 sergeants, 2 white and 2 black. A highway patrolman stopped us on the way down to Parris Island in South Carolina. The guy driving the car, that owned the car, was a white guy from Boston. This highway patrolman stopped us, and he told him, says, I see you're not particular who you ride with. And this guy from Boston didn't take that too kindly. And matter of fact, we had to hold him back because he's about to really get himself in trouble. But that highway patrolman told him, says, I will see you again. We were in training in DI school, and this white sergeant went out into town one night, and he got jumped by 6 guys. They beat him up, matter of fact, broke his ribs. And while he was laying on the ground, that that highway patrolman says, I told you I'd see you again. He walked up, he had it done. He says, I guess from now on, you'll be more careful about who you associate with. Now, it's funny because it didn't happen to us, but it happened to him. So, but that's what I was saying, during Montford Point, the Montford Point Marines, when they were on Camp Lejeune during that time, they was not allowed to go on the main camp. If they had to go to the main camp for any reason, they had to be escorted by a white Marine. There was one black Montford Point Marine that was killed in Jacksonville because he was black wearing the Marine Corps uniform. And there was other incidents. There was one incident that was where a black Marine was on a bus, and these white guys was going to jump on him, and the white Marine stood up and told him, says, well, you can do anything you want to him, but if you damage that uniform, you got to deal with all of us. So I think that ended that. But I bring up that to say that these guys went through that, and, would you have gone through, it's enough trying to serve during the war, and if you got to go through all of this to serve. When they was on the train, I was talking to a number of them, when they was on the train going down for training, they boarded the train here in Detroit, and it was going down. When they got to Washington, D.C., it split. You had to go to the colored section. And the white and black was not allowed to be in the same section together. So it was issues like that. But in view of all of that, they did still serve honorably. Any more?
Now, you said you served as a drill instructor?
Yes, I was an officer's drill instructor.
Where was that at?
Quantico.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was fun.
Have you seen the HBO series, The Pacific, about the Marines serving in World War II in the Pacific?
Oh yeah, about the Marines in World War II in the Pacific. Yeah. That was really good. A lot of people don't realize, but how the casualty rates. So many of them guys only made one island, and because the casualty rates was so high. Like I say, they lost 7,000 killed in 3 days taking the island of Okinawa. I mean, not Okinawa, Iwo Jima. And I'm not sure what the casualty rate on Okinawa was, but it was higher. And this is what a lot of people don't understand, that when they was ready to go to take the island of Japan, they had expected that they were going to lose around 500,000 men. And because the Japanese was different from the Germans. The Japanese didn't give up. They fought to the last man. And that's why casualty rates was so high, much higher. But you imagine that you expect to lose 500,000 people. That's, and you have people that really question whether they should have dropped the bomb or not. Well, if you was one of the ones sitting out there on that island getting ready for that attack, because they was going to have to bring the troops from Europe to the Pacific to go take Japan. And the only thing that stopped that was the was the loss. Was the bomb. So that's unimaginable. We suffered casualties in Vietnam, but and I even look at Desert Storm and Iraq and Afghanistan, and they were talking about, I think in 10 years in Iraq and Afghanistan they lost 10,000 or something like that. But you lost that almost in one battle in World War II. And that's just, one 3-day battle, you lose that many. So if it's quite a difference. Okay, well, if anybody else, no more questions. Thank you very much.
This was a great history, and I think this guy should write a book. Because it's a fascinating history. It's going to be lost if somebody doesn't do it, and I think that's fascinating. And I can attest that by 1966, the Marine Corps was well integrated, and they had black DIs at Pensacola also. And they made a lasting impression on me from the first time he looked at me and asked me to get the F off his quarterdeck. And I went, what the hell is a quarterdeck? And it was downhill from there. So that's a fascinating story.
I had another little story. I had the occasion that when I was down there with 24 Marines, I think I was the first sergeant at the time, and this major checked in, and he says, "First Sergeant, I've seen you somewhere before." And I says, "Well, Major," I said, "I've been around. I don't remember." So the next day he came in, he says, "I remember where I saw you from." And he held up his OCS picture. I was his sergeant instructor in OCS. He recounted some of the things I did, and I denied I didn't remember any of it.
Okay. Just a comment. This is a little bit of trivia. He talked about the invasion of Japan and the possible losses. What was the biggest draft month of World War II? What month in World War II were the most men drafted?
March
Yeah,
or 45. March or 45.
Okay, you're close. It was June of 1945. They called up 440,000 men for the invasion of Japan. They needed 1 million men, and what had happened with the war in Europe being over, all of the people who had draft deferments to build munitions lost their draft deferments. My father was one of them. He worked here at Willow Run building the B-24 bombers, and he was drafted in June of 1945, and he was at Fort Lewis, Washington, preparing for the invasion of Japan when the war ended. So, like many people, I thought dropping the bomb was probably the right thing to do because it brought it to a quick end, and that was the right thing to do.